Welcome, everyone, to a long overdue next episode of Drunk Agile. Yes, Prateek and I were on our summer holidays, and we're happy to be back and getting back in the saddle, back on the horse. So I already introduced you, Prateek, so I'm not gonna ask
Talking about horse.
you.
Yeah, she's hiding back there. I don't know if
Oh,
anyone can see her. She's
the-
she's hidden. I don't even know. Oh, there.
oh, there's a snout.
You get a little you get a little sneak peek right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
so glad to have Nisha back with us. Prateek as well. Prateek, what are you drinking?
Um, to keep going back to this, the Blair Ethel
Yeah,
12-year old
that's good stuff.
bourbon hogshead. Obviously bourbon with that coloring on that. And
So, if I remember correctly, you said you were going to share that with me, and that looks a little bit more than half empty. I'm just saying.
define share.
Yeah.
Isn't a single drink share?
Right. So, speaking of Blair Athol, I've been drinking way too much bourbon lately. So I'm back to my Blair Athol as well. But this is a wine cask. Making my way through it. But yeah, my problem is just too much bourbon, and that will just never do. We need to get back. I think we said this before. The great thing about drinking bourbon is when you go back to proper whiskey, Scotch, as Americans would say, whiskey tastes so much better. It's just so much better. You can tell
There's
just
more
the difference
happening
in
there. Yeah.
just the difference in quality. My opinion, of course, which is always correct. We're starting back this Drunk Agile with another viewer question. This one comes from Phil. We're way overdue. Phil sent this a few weeks ago. Way overdue in answering this question, and he's done a great job of setting this up for us. So I'm just going to read the question, and then Prateek, I'll hand it over to you, and we'll see what Phil says. And by the way, those of you who have questions, we do listen to you. Please send us any questions you have on Twitter, post it on the comments, whatever. So here we go. The concept of right-sizing a piece of work is predicated on an appreciation of the effort / complexity / duration of the work required, a form of estimate, if you like. That's true. This feels to play into the hands of ex-ante analysis, which is widely understood to have its limitations, and too much of this is generally seen as wasteful. That's also true. At times, it feels like we're being guided to just start and understand more as we work through. However, to establish a stable system from a metrics perspective, it feels we need to have a degree of understanding of the size / complexity in order to size items. The two are opposed, and I would appreciate your guidance on finding the sweet spot to achieve meaningful metrics without too much waste in the form of ex-ante analysis. Great question. There's a lot there that I think we need to unpack. So I guess before I hand it over to you, if all of you haven't seen our videos on right sizing, please go back and watch those videos on right sizing. We also have a video on ex ante versus ex post analysis, or whatever. So you might want to go back and read some of that. So Prateek, having said all that, what's the answer?
There's a 2-drink minimum question.
Easy.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for sending that in, because yeah, as I said, it's a great question, and if you've heard Dan and I talk over and over again about this kind of stuff, we've said, yeah, just start this thing. Let's just do a rough thing, just start it, and then you'll figure it out. And meanwhile, if you go to the more traditional way of working, a waterfall phased approach, there's a phase, whatever month-long phase for understanding the problem, and then moving to the next phase. And these are diametrically opposed, completely opposite of each other, where we're saying, hey, just start the thing and you'll figure it out, versus spend a good amount of time figuring it out before you start it. There obviously, between these two options, there's a rainbow of options. If For us, for Dan and I at least, I'm going to speak for Dan here, we tend to err on the side of do as little as possible before you start working on the thing, and instead of do a lot to figure this thing out. But to Phil's point, you have heard us talk about right sizing. You have heard us talk about just little as possible being understand enough in the context of your own data to say, is this thing just too big? And do we need to break it up? Or is it just good enough and we can move on with it?
Yep.
So,
I'm glad you brought up not that you wouldn't, but the point
Mhm.
about understanding the context of your own data, because let's talk about a specific example. And I believe we mentioned this in our ultimate case study. It's been several years since I've actually read it. Shame on me. But let's take the specific case of, maybe it's a higher level. Oh, I don't know, a portfolio board that we're working on, and we're tracking epics at at the portfolio board level. And let's say our work breakdown structure is such that we have epics that are breaking down into stories.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we did at Ultimate Software, which I'm hoping a lot of you have done as well, is gathered all of the data from previous epics and understood, okay, a typical epic that has moved through the system, how many stories did that break down into? And I think at Ultimate, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 85% of them were 20 stories, 20 stories or less. So to Phil's point, one of the things that we did is we assumed when an epic came into our system, without doing too much upfront analysis, we just kind of assumed, this epic will be 20 stories or less. If for whatever reason we had reason to believe that thing would be bigger than 20 stories, then yeah, we broke that thing up immediately. But the assumption was really that this thing was going to be 20 stories or less. And to Prateek's point, we would just pull it in and start working on it. But then, that requires diligence, because as you're working on it, you will discover new stuff, and as you actually get in and you start breaking and defining stories and things like that, you might quickly find out that, hey, this thing looks like it's going to be bigger than 20 stories, and that thing needs to be broken up. So this is one thing that you might consider. Not only, all the fills of the world is, if that is your context where, you've got these bigger items that you're breaking up into smaller items, go take a look. Those typical bigger items, how many of those smaller items did they break up into? And can you make some reasonable assumptions about, how many that should be in order to be right-sized? Should we have 20 stories or less in our epics, or should it be something else? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's a point that we often make, but is we haven't seen it applied really well in most places. Is teams get really good at the day-to-day the day-to-day work items, splitting those up. But because it's not a discipline that's above that team level, at that potentially portfolio level, we don't get really good at saying this request came in from the customer. How many epics is this, or how many features is this? We're usually just assume that this is one thing, and we're going to just work the stories underneath it. So the right sizing of those epics should not, just to go back to the question that Phil was asking, should not take a long time. If it's taking a long time, you're taking all that time away from actually doing the work. So we can do a quick and dirty, yeah, this looks good, let's move on. And then back to your point, Dan, as that thing makes progress and we learn more, and if it's getting too big, let's break that thing up then.
Yeah. And then you can do kind of, a crude form of what's known as reference class forecasting, if you will. And that is, if you have a project or an epic, you might just quickly say, hey, does this project or does this epic, does this whatever feature, whatever it is, does it look like something we've done in the past? Is there, an analogy to it, which might help us to hone whether the thing is sized right or not, rather than saying, hey, let's look at everything we've always done. Hey, this is a regulatory item, and we know that our regulatory items roughly take this long. That is another option. As you can hopefully maybe kind of tell from the tone of my voice, I'm less enthusiastic about that, rather than what I mentioned before is, can we understand, from a breakdown perspective, if this thing is right sized or not. But that is an option. That's about, especially if you're talking about projects that you've really never done before, brand new team, brand new technology, whatever.
Yeah, and I'm reading through the question again, and I think at some point, trying to find this, but I thought that Phil mentioned running a stable system at some point.
He does, yeah. To
Yeah.
establish a stable system from a metrics perspective, it feels we need to have a degree of understanding of size.
Yeah. And it's not, I guess the point we're trying to make here is, yeah, your stable system, you're absolutely right that you need to have some degree of understanding. You just don't need an absolute degree of understanding. As long as those items are of the same order of magnitude, you're probably fine. You just don't, you're better off being approximately right instead of precisely wrong in this case.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the sizing and complexity from a stable system perspective, the sizing and complexity really only comes into play if you look at, drum roll please, aging, right?
Yeah.
You know, if the way you know whether something is too big or not is if it's aging too long. So size in and of itself, you know, there's nothing, I think we've said this 1,000 times before. There's nothing in queuing theory. There's nothing in things like Little's Law. There's nothing, you know, that like if you read Shewhart or Deming or whatever, there's none of that stuff that says you have to have items to be of similar size to run a stable system. That just doesn't exist. But what Little will say is that you can't have items age too much. And so that's the true indicator of, you know, from a size perspective, whether something is too big or not. So, you know, so when he says to establish a stable system from a metrics perspective, it feels like we need to have a degree of understanding of size. Kind of yes, but mostly no, right? Up front, you really don't need to know that. It's really as you're working on it and you see it's aging too long, that's when the alarm bell should go off in terms of, hey, this thing is too big and it's causing instability in our system.
Yeah, and if you get to that part of right sizing your epics, as we were talking about earlier, and reducing that instability, it actually makes forecasting and planning so much easier. Because let's say we're at that point where we're saying 85% of our epics are 20 stories or less, and we do a forecast for the next quarter and it says 100 stories, our team can get 100 stories done. Well, cool, 100 divided by 20 is 5. We can confidently commit to 5 epics as long as we are actively working on right sizing those epics.
So I mean, I don't know. That sounded like the last word for me. I was going to kind of wrap it up. I mean, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I didn't want to just recap. The real question that Phil put out there was, how much analysis is too much analysis in order to figure out should we start this work or not? And by analysis, I mean understanding the item in order to estimate it. From a perspective, just enough to find out if this is larger than other things that have flown through your system in the past. If this just seems outsized for things that have flown through your system in the past, that's probably enough. And let's move on and start working on it. If this becomes too big, we'll break it up.
Yep. And I always say I'm gonna let you have the last word, but I never do. We all know this. Just to kind of piggyback what you were saying there, you can add on to that, because I wanted to reiterate something you said. We can add on to that is that analysis is done in the context of hopefully some data that you've collected, right? That will help you, that will guide you in terms of what that right size is, whether it's number of stories per epics or whatever that metric is that you're using. So. What do all of you think? You know, about Phil's question. Are there other techniques that you use to right size, to stop the ex ante analysis paralysis? Please leave us a comment, and as we said, if you have any other questions, please let us know. Another special thanks to Phil for that question. Really do appreciate it. We were looking for some good material to get us started back here. So. Really grateful for that question. For Nisha, who is still kind of hiding.
I think now we get a pause. We get 2 pause.
2 pause.
We get 2 pause.
for the 2 pause of Nisha, for Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vacanti. I want to say thank you so much for listening / watching, and we will see you in the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.